So when I was a kid, my grandpa would give me 50 cents for every A I got in school. 50 cents. Now, when you're a kid, 50 cents, that's a lot. Like this coin was everything to me as a kid. And then it's funny that when you start to become an adult, the value of things start to change. Somewhere along the line, I stopped measuring cents and dollars, and I started feeling the weight of seconds and hours. And so in 2011, there was this woman named Candy Chang. Now, Candy, she's an urban developer, and she took an abandoned building in her hometown in New Orleans, and she turned it into a work of art. You see, Candy had recently lost somebody in her life that she cared deeply for, and in trying to deal with the weight of that loss, she just started asking some really deep questions about life. And she thought, if I'm asking these questions, maybe some other people are asking these questions too. So Candy took an abandoned wall and she painted the whole thing in chalkboard paint. And she wrote about 1,000 lines, this phrase: before I die, I want to blank. And then she sat out a bunch of chalk and she waited. She wondered, what are the people of the city gonna do? Are they going to participate? Are they gonna vandalize this thing? Or are they gonna even notice it? And sure enough, days later, thousands of people showed up and they filled in every single line on that wall, writing in what they would do before they died. Like this wall was a moment for the city. And this moment, it became a movement. And now there are dozens of Before I Die walls scattered all across the country because this wall resonates with what you and I fear and know to be true. Our days are finite. That's why what you do with your days are significant. Now, you and I are never going to be able to increase the quantity of our days, but we can determine the quality of our days. And that's why what you do with those days means everything. Now, to spend your life trying to abandon this truth is futile because no amount of frantic activity or overcommitment is going to avoid this truth. And that's why everybody here today is going to have to answer one question. And it's one of the most important questions you are ever going to face in your life. Now, the night before Jesus is crucified, he's having one last dinner with his best friends. It's a group of 12 guys that he has spent the last 3 years of his life pouring everything into. Like these guys have just spent the last 3 years hearing Jesus speak words of power that has changed the hardest hearts and has incited political upheaval. They've heard Jesus speak words of authority where he has told blind men to see and he has told dead men to live. But on this night, in this room, it's different. Jesus' words, they're heavy and time feels short. And we pick the narrative up in John 13, verse 33. And Jesus says this: where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? Then Peter says, I will lay my life down for you. And Jesus answered, will you lay your life down for me? Will you, Peter? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. What a powerful question. It's the question that every single person in this room is destined to answer. As a matter of fact, this question is the entire point of my entire sermon today, and that is this: what are you willing to die for? Because everybody's gonna die for something. And one day you are going to breathe your last breath. And all the other breaths that you have ever breathed before that last breath will have been breathed into something. Now, this isn't the first time that Peter has had to put a value on his life. We know that in Luke, at the beginning of Peter's relationship with Jesus and at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, we don't know a whole lot about Jesus at this point, except for the fact that he's just a guy that when he preaches, he brings it. And Peter at this point is just a fisherman. And on this day in Luke, Peter has been fishing all night and he hasn't caught anything. And so it's morning and he's bringing the boat in, most likely to clean the nets, to go back out in the heat of the day, because when you're a fisherman and you don't catch fish, you don't eat. So at that moment, as he's coming to shore, Jesus is getting pressed against the water. He is preaching and a crowd is growing, and they both collide, and Jesus hijacks Peter's boat. And he turns into a pulpit. And he preaches to the people. And then when Jesus is done preaching, he looks over at Peter, realizing that he doesn't have any fish. And here's what he says in Luke. He says, Peter, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. As if to say, listen, Jesus, I know our relationship is very new. Clearly you preach, I'm trying to fish. Let's just keep it that way. But to reiterate that point, I will do what you've told me to do, which sounds crazy. So it says, Peter says, but at your word, I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, when they took the nets and they flipped them over into the deep water, it says that the nets enclosed with such a large number of fish that the nets were beginning to break. And in that moment, Simon Peter knew who Jesus was. And he said, he fell down at Jesus' knees saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. And then when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and they followed him. They left everything. Everything has a cost. And at some point, we have lost the ability to adequately value what's important in life. And when you devalue something, you abandon its cost. Now, I think it's safe to say that the world has a value issue. Isn't it crazy the things that we used to hold in such high regard that we don't seem to care about anymore? I mean, how many of you know somebody who has abandoned their dreams, their hopes, and their goals, and they've ultimately abandoned the calling that God has in their life to settle for a safe career? How many of us in this room right now are guilty of trading family time for screen time? And what about those in the room that have taken self-worth and they've replaced it with self-harm? And here we are in this moment. Peter is face down in a pile of fish, and Peter has a value issue. See, Peter can't get past who he is. And so because of that, Peter is in the presence of Jesus, and he realizes that he is a sinful man, and he's on the edge of missing out on something amazing in his life. And I wonder how many of us can relate right now to Peter? That for whatever reason, you can't get past who you are right now. And you've sat in a service like this, and you've heard somebody like me speak truth over your life, and you thought to yourself, that is amazing, life-changing truth that could do something incredible in someone's life, but that someone's not me. Because you can't get past yourself. And I think this is the reason why we struggle with the question, what are you willing to die for? Because I think most of us in this room feel like we are inadequate to answer that question because we don't think our life has any kind of value to give up for something. We can't get past ourselves. So I want to say a statement that's going to be one of many statements that I hope interferes in your life and helps you to get over yourself. You are more than what you think about yourself. I'm going to say it again so you can hear me in the back. You are more than what you think about yourself. I know this to be true because of what Jesus says in John. In John 15:16, Jesus says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you." Now listen, I know some of y'all are sitting here saying, listen, man, if I had to pick somebody, I wouldn't even pick me. But let me tell you something. It's a good thing you're not in charge of who gets picked. There is somebody who's in charge of who gets picked. His name is Jesus, and he is very clear that he's already picked you. And you need to understand something. You're not some pity pick to God, as if God feels bad about you and he brought you on his team so you could have a better day. God picked you for a purpose because God has an expectation out of your life. He expects you to do something significant. He expects you to bear fruit that will last. That's why everybody in this room's got to answer the question. Because there is something that you're going to give your entire life to. And whatever that is, it's going to come with a cost. Now, for Peter, this idea of cost was very significant for him. There's actually a moment in the Gospel of Mark that Peter helps record that stuck out to him in his life. So Jesus is just like us. He's hanging out at church, and the disciples are over in the corner, and Jesus is just watching people put money in the offering plate. And in Mark chapter 12, verse 41, it says this, "And he sat down opposite the treasury, and he watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow, she came and she put in 2 small copper coins, which makes a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, 'Truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box, for they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on.' This woman walks up, and in a box, she puts in 2 coins. She put in everything. Those 2 coins represented everything she had in her entire life, and she dropped it in the box because, listen, that's what it takes. What does it take when you're willing to die for something? It takes everything. And so the question you got to ask yourself is, what are you willing to give everything for? Now, Peter thought he knew. Because 3 years later, Peter's sitting by a fire and he's yards away from Jesus. Jesus, who has been taken in the middle of the night. He has been betrayed by his friends. He is standing trial in a couple hours. They're going to brutally murder him as he takes on the sins of the world. And here's Peter. He's hanging out by the fire, literally yards away, trying to listen in on what's happening with Jesus. And he's trying not to get seen. Because he knows if they see me, they're probably going to arrest me, and I don't know what's about to happen. So if you're familiar with the moment, you know what happens next. Peter's just sitting there trying to be chill, and then someone walks up to him, and they recognize him and say, hey, this guy knows who Jesus is. I've seen him with Jesus. To which Peter's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen Jesus before. I don't know the man. I'm just sitting out here like you, enjoying the fire. Leave me be. And then a little bit passes and somebody walks up to him and recognizes Peter by the way he talks. I know this guy. This guy knows Jesus. He's been with Jesus. Peter's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Leave me alone. And he's confronted a 3rd time. One of the Gospels records that Peter even curses. He curses, I don't know who you're talking about. And in Luke 22, it says this. Peter said, man, I do not know what you are talking about. And immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and he wept bitterly. That's the thing about cost. You are going to pay a price for everything you do and everything you don't do. You and I, we do not get to decide not to pay the price. We just get to decide what price we're gonna pay. That's it. And in this moment, Peter is by the fire and he has a value issue. Because Peter can't get past the moment that he's in. And I just wonder how many of us are here today, just like Peter. You are in a moment right now and you've been stuck for a while. Maybe your moment has been a week. Maybe it's been a month. Maybe it's been this past year. Maybe your moment has been the past decade of your life, but you are in a moment and you are stuck and you don't know how to get out. And somehow our life has become a walking billboard of irony. That despite how many promises you have made to yourself, you have become what you promised you weren't going to become. And somewhere along the lines, we rationalize that the only way to get ourselves out of the mess that we're in is to somehow be the hero of our story. This is the heart of sin. It's this moment where we think somehow I'm the hero, somehow I'm gonna work myself out of the messes and the moments that I get myself in. Because in that moment, when you choose to be the hero, what you're believing is you're better than God. Now listen, I know some of y'all aren't gonna be saying that out loud. I don't know very many people who would say, yeah, I think I'm smarter than God. Yeah, I think I know better than God. I don't know a lot of people that actually think that and believe that, but that's what you think when you do what you do. Any moment in your life when you are faced with a decision that is against what God wants for you, it's against the core of his love, and you choose that over God, that is sin. When you look at lust and you say, I want that. When you look at hate and you say, I want that. When you look at anger and resentment and greed and selfishness and laziness and you say, I want that more than I want God, that is the heart of sin. And despite how absurd it is, that you and I are gonna somehow fix what's wrong with us, we keep going to that bucket thinking that, you know what, tomorrow the best hope I have is I just gotta be a better version of myself. If I just try harder, somehow I'll get out of this moment that I'm in. And listen, there is nobody in your life who has lied to you, let you down, or hurt you more than you. We are not the hero of our stories. And the moment that that truth gets a hold of your heart, we do what Peter does and we run. Because you know what the opposite of abandoning the cost is? It's chasing compromise. And compromise is not about losing. Compromise is about deciding. Compromise is making the decision that you are not worth it. And so when you get caught up in the moment, you decide that I don't have any value. And the moment you devalue your faith, the moment you devalue who you are in the image of God, you abandon the cost that it took to get you in that relationship with God. And just like Peter, there's a bunch of us in this room and there's a bunch of us online right now, and we are on the edge of missing out on something amazing. And this is the tension that brings us all together right now in this moment. How can I give everything to something when I've got nothing to give because of this moment that I have been stuck in? And so in moments like these, the gospel does what the gospel always does. The gospel, the good news, the reality that on Friday they took him and they beat him and they nailed him to a cross. But on Sunday, he walked out of the tomb, defeating death, defeating hell, defeating sin. The gospel always shows up. It always shows up. And in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, Paul says these words, but God, ooh, man. I wish I had a microphone and a couple hours and we can go around this room and we can give some but God testimonies. How many people have been there where I was lost, but God found me? I was broken, but God put me back together. I was in a dark place and I was chained and God found me and he set me free. Come on, let's celebrate that truth. How many of you excited today that you had a moment that God showed up in your life, but God? That's what the gospel does, church. It always shows up. And Paul says, but God, he shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And he says in Romans 8, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Church, you need to understand this. Despite how far your failures have taken you, God's faithfulness will always take you farther. God is at work right now in your life. He is at work in your life. You need to understand, he's been at work since before day one of your life. He's gonna be at work at day 100 in your life. God doesn't stop working for your good. And it doesn't matter if you feel it. It doesn't matter if you believe it, because God does not operate on the basis of your belief. He operates on the basis of his authority and who he is. And God just keeps showing up. He doesn't just show up for the best version of you. He shows up for the broken reality of who you are. This is what God does. God shows up, and because of that, you are more than your moments. Some of y'all need to hear that again. You are more than the moment that you are in right now. And I know it's been a painful moment. I know for some of you, this has lasted longer than a year. I know for some of you, this has deeply got into the roots of your soul, and you've allowed it to become the identity of who you are. But I'm telling you right now, the gospel sets us free, that you are more than the moment that you are in right now. And that's why everybody in this room, we got to answer the question, what are you willing to die for? Something in your life is going to get the best and worst version of you. It better be worth it. So we come back to Peter, whose life started with a call, but it got messy with the compromise. And in John 21, we find Peter, and Peter has a value issue because Peter can't get past what he's done. He can't get past what he's done. And so in John 21, this is days after the resurrection. Like, we've already had Easter celebration, man, and we should be on top of the world with what's going on. Jesus has come back, but for some reason, Peter doesn't think Jesus has come back for him. So Peter does what we all do. What do we do when we can't get past what we've done? We just go to what we know. So in John 21, Peter's fishing all night. He doesn't catch a thing. And sure enough, the sun's starting to crack, and Jesus walks up on the shore, except they don't know it's Jesus. And Jesus shouts out, "Hey, you guys caught any fish?" To which a frustrated, broken Peter is like, "No, leave us alone." And then Jesus says, "Hey, why don't you throw the net on the other side of the boat?" I just wish I could have been there in that moment to wonder what kind of conversation they're having. Like, who is this guy? I wonder at some point if someone's like, "Just throw it on the other side of the boat," so he leaves us alone. And so Peter grabs the net and he throws it on the other side of the boat, thinking it's gonna be like nothing. And then instantly the net fills with fish. John looks at Peter and he says, "It's Jesus." And Jesus, who loved Peter so much, recreates the first miracle that got Peter into this mess in the first place. And when Peter realizes that Jesus didn't just come back, but Jesus came back for him, he jumps off the boat and he swims to Jesus. And you know what's waiting at the shore? A fire. Oh man, I love the poetry of the gospel. I love the fact that God will step into the places that were our most painful to bring us promise. That the last time Peter sat by a fire, it was the worst day of his life. But this time God has recreated the fire to help Peter realize the most important time of his life. And it's by the fire in John 21 that Jesus has this conversation. It says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." Then he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and another will dress you and carry you where you did not want to go." This he said to show what kind of death Peter was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." See, Jesus didn't ask Peter 3 times if he loved him because Jesus needed to know. He asked him because he needed Peter to know. Jesus knew that Peter loved him, but Peter didn't know that he loved Jesus. Peter didn't know that he could be what he needed to be. And in that moment, they have this reuniting by the fire, and Peter is reinstated in the ministry. And Jesus says, Peter, I know that you love me, but you got to understand something. When we walk away from this fire, I'm asking for everything. I'm asking for everything. Because there will come a day where they will take you and they will kill you for my name. And you got to be willing to give everything. And Peter says, I will die for you. Peter went on to become a catalyst of the early church. We're sitting here today because of Peter. He wrote 2 letters that significantly impacted the New Testament. And about 60 years after this conversation, when Peter is an old man and he has preached to thousands upon thousands of people, and his ministry impact has changed the lives of billions, Peter is arrested and he is taken to a cross. And as they're getting ready to nail him to it, because he knows he is not worthy of the same death that his Savior Jesus died, Peter asks them historically, could you crucify me upside down? And Peter gave everything. He gave everything for Jesus. And that's what I love about Peter's life. It started with the call, it got messy with the compromise, but it ended with a comeback. Now, I'm not talking about Peter's comeback. I'm talking about God's comeback. That Jesus came back for Peter. And you need to understand something. Despite your insecurities, despite your messy moments, despite you not being able to get over yourself, your comeback is not being written. Church, your comeback has already happened because they took Jesus, they beat him, they broke him, they buried him in a tomb, but 3 days later, he kicked the end of that tomb out. And if he came back for Peter, he can come back for you. He can come back for you. Some of y'all thinking here and you still think this message isn't for me. This message is for you. I told you today's somebody's day. I told you this was the end of somebody's season. I told you today God's going to set some people free. You need to know that Jesus, if he did it for Peter, he could do it for you. Because you are more than what you have done. Oh, goodness, you are so much. You are way more than what you've done. You are what Jesus has done. That when you say yes to Jesus, your life's connected to him. That's why everybody in the room has to answer the question. And you need to understand something. Your life is a walking testimony of God's grace. You are not a cautionary tale, but you are a declaration of hope. You are a living example of what God can do in someone's life. Don't you take that away from God. Don't you take that away from people. There are people that are going to be looking at your life and saying, if God can do that for them, God can do that for me. If God can do that for Peter, God can do that for me. If God can do it for me, God could do it for you. You are not done. Man, this gets me fired up. Because I've been in this moment. I've lived in this space before. I've had time in my life where I have let go of the cost and I have chased after compromise. And I've been in that moment where I've laid on that floor in a pile of tears. And I said, God, it's all yours. You get it all. Every single drop, every single piece of me, whatever you want, take it. What are you willing to die for? This is the question that Jesus has been asking Peter his entire life. In the boat, come follow me. In the upper room, will you lay your life down for me? At the fire, do you love me? It's the same question. What are you willing to die for? And chances are it's the same question that God has been asking you, and maybe today is the first time you've ever realized it. What are you willing to die for? That's all I got for you today. Just this one question. Now listen, if you want practicality, Pastor Mike has spent the last 6 weeks crushing it with Triple Point. You got 6 weeks of online content that is full of practical application on how to live out a life of a disciple, but none of that means anything if you can't answer this question. This is your life we're talking about, your one and only precious, finite life. And this is the cross, the bloodied, broken, beautiful cross. And you gotta respond to the cross. Listen, you gotta do something with Jesus. Do you love him? Will you follow him? Will you lay your life down for Jesus? Then he gets everything. He gets everything. Any other response to the cross, but everything is blasphemy. It's everything. And it's all I got. This is all you got. This is all we got. Now listen, we can play church games, or we can come to the conclusion that you and I, we get one. We get one thing in our life that gets everything. Your greatest challenge today is not going to be your discipline and your devotion and your focus. Your greatest challenge today is actually believing the gospel is true. That could it be that there is a God who loves me so much that his love is wide and it is deep and it is high and it is expansive and it is invasive, that he loved me, that he died for me, that he came back for me. And church, he deserves every single bit of who I am. Oh, he gets it all. He gets it all. He gets everything. He gets my family. He gets my finances. He gets my energy. He gets my time. He gets my thoughts. He gets my bad days. He gets my good days. He gets everything. It's his. The answer to the question today, what are you willing to die for? It's got to be Jesus. It's always been Jesus. It'll always be Jesus. It'll never stop being Jesus. Jesus gets it all. He gets it all. I preached a message like this several years ago, and I was trying to find a story to end it. Man, that's better than ending on a good story. I found a video, a real life recorded video from a missionary in Africa. So there's this missionary, and he would kind of hit this circuit where he hit about 10 to 12 tribes in a year, and he would just circle through all year. And every time him and his team would show up, they would spend the whole week in a tribe, and they would set up a medical facility, and they would help with the farmers, and they would help with the mothers, and then every night they would preach. And they preached the gospel. And at the end of the night, they would give an altar call to accept Jesus, and then they would have offering. Now, these were poor villages, so nobody had anything, but what they had, they gave. And so most of the time at the end of the night, in response to how grateful they were to hear the gospel, people would bring literally what they had. So they would bring fruit and vegetables, and they would bring animals, and they'd bring clothes, just whatever they had and they could make, they would lay it at the altar as gratitude for what Jesus gave, and then the mission would use it to help other places. And so when you're a preacher and you're a missionary and you're in a room and you see the same people every night, you get to watch people be changed literally in front of your eyes by the gospel. And so as this preacher began the revival on a Monday, he noticed every night there was a woman who sat in the back left. And he just watched every night as he preached his heart out, and he watched her as there was just this constant struggle and sadness in her face. The second night before the revival, mission week ended, he noticed that night, and to be honest, like he kind of went hard, and he kind of stared at her a lot because he felt like she was on the edge of making a decision. And at the end, when he gave his altar call, he watched as she sat in the back and she wept and she sobbed, but she never came up. At the end of the service, she just walked out. So he reached out to the local pastor who was there, and he's like, I've been here all week preaching, and I've been looking at the back corner, and there's this woman, and man, I thought tonight she was going to come forward, and what is her story? And he says, that's Anna. Anna's had the hardest year of her life. Her family was poor to begin with. Then over the course of a year, there was a terrible accident. She lost both her husband and her son. She's a widow. She's got nothing. The women in the village have been taking care of her, but it's been tough. So when the missionary heard that, his heart was broken for her, and he was hoping that he would see her for the last night of revival. So sure enough, everybody came in to pack the place, and in the back left, there was Anna. But this time, her face was completely different. As he preached the words and the truth of Jesus, there was no sadness, there was no struggle, there was no frustration, there was just smiles. And at the end of the service, they'd given the altar call, and at the end of the altar call, they opened up the altar for people to bring the offerings, and much to his surprise, Anna stepped in line. The local pastor stepped in and said, all right, this is gonna be interesting. As everybody came one by one, laying at the altar their gifts, Anna walked up and laid down an incredibly valuable coin. The kind of value that you work your whole life for. Well, Anna doesn't have anything. So after everybody left, the pastor pulled her aside with the missionary, and he says, Anna, I noticed that you laid down this very valuable coin. This is a lifetime worth of wages, Anna. We need to know where you got this coin. Anna said, Pastor, this last year of my life has been the hardest year. You know that I lost my husband and I lost my son, and to be honest, a week ago I thought about taking my life. But I knew the missionary was coming, and I knew that before I did something like that, I needed to hear what he had to say. So I showed up every night and I listened to him preach the gospel, and I listened to him talk about this man named Jesus who knows me and loved me and gave his life to save me. And Pastor, last night when you gave that altar call, I gave my life to Jesus. And for the first time in forever, I felt full and I felt complete and I felt whole and I felt safe. And Pastor, I wanted nothing else but to lay something at the altar to show my appreciation for what Jesus did to me. Pastor, you know I don't have anything. I'm poor. So she said, this morning, I went over to the local tribe and I sold myself. That coin is my life's wage. And the pastor's like, whoa, Anna, what are you talking about? What did you do? He says, no. I was hopeless until last night. And the only response, Pastor, that I could give was to trade my life in for this coin and lay it at the altar. Anna literally laid her life down at the altar for Jesus. Now, I know you're here today and you don't got a coin in your hand, but you have a choice. You get one life, church. You get one. You are going to die for something. You're going to give all your breaths to something. Why can't it be Jesus? Why can't he be the one that gets everything? I wonder what would happen right now in this moment if we took our relationship with God serious. What would happen if we laid it at his feet and we said, everything I got is yours. You get it all, Jesus. Everything. Use me. Whew. What could a life like that look like? God, we thank you so much for this moment. God, we thank you for this truth. God, we know that there are people right now that are they're dealing with what you have spoken, that there are those of us that are here that we have spent so many years caught in the moment that we believed the lie that God, that you can't work past where we've been. You can't work past who we are. And Peter's life is a testament that if you can do it for Peter, you can do it for us. And that those are those of us that are right now, God, that we just need a moment where we just need to lay our lives back down at you and say, Jesus, I have run away. I have run from the cost and I've chased compromise and I don't want to do it anymore. Today, there are some of us who are in this room and some of us who are online And we've spent our entire lifetime investing every bit of ourselves in things that only leave us empty. And maybe today, for the first time, we're realizing that the only thing worth all of our life is you, Jesus. That we are selfish, broken sinners who are lost. And despite how many times we try to fix what's wrong with us, God, it never works. And God, in this moment, I'm just asking that you would just stir our hearts, that for those of us who need you, would cry out to you and say, save me. But Jesus, if those of us in the room are in that space, that we would just say these words, that we would say, Jesus, I know that I'm lost, and I know that I am a sinner. And I know that you gave your life for me. And I know that 3 days later you walked out of that tomb for me. And I know that all of my insecurities and my messy moments and all the things that I've done were abolished the moment you walked out of that grave. And Jesus, I ask that you would take my life. I lay my life down like Anna at the cross. I lay it at your feet and I say it's yours. Jesus, we believe that right now as people are praying that prayer and saying those, that you are welcoming in new souls into your kingdom, that people right now are feeling the weight of those chains being broken. God, that they are realizing that there is something worth giving our entire lives to, and that is you. God, we thank you for this journey that we've been on, Triple Point. We thank you for the truths that you've shown us of what it means to grow and what it means to chase after you. Let that motivate us and challenge us and help us to pursue others as we lead into these next 2 weeks. Because 2 weeks from now, we're going to celebrate the greatest day that has ever existed, the day that you set us free from sin, and the day that you walked out victorious, securing our eternity forever. And God, if we have sold out to you, then we get that. So Jesus, as we sing and as we worship you, and as this song becomes our prayer, let our lifted voices bring you praise and bring you glory. And we thank you, Jesus, for the decisions that were made today and the lives that were changed, because it is all done and all said in the name that is above all names, and that is your name, Jesus. Amen.